Marty, welcome aboard to the show. So happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So you have an incredibly interesting story. You came from interesting origins and decided to go to the Air Force. Give us the backstory there. How did that happen? Was it scary? Was it interesting? Did anybody tell you to do it, or was it all on your own?
Thank goodness my folks are no longer on the planet or they wouldn't be able to listen to this one. I grew up in central Pennsylvania in a very small, heavily dominated Amish Mennonite community, which I'm sure other people have already heard this story. But I saw, I had a lot of cousins and a brother all older than me, and they went to college or, went into family businesses, but they always had the college debt and no job. So I thought, that's not going to be me. So as a junior in high school, I went into the recruiter's office, and of course you have to test. So I tested fairly high in math, which I had great math teachers. And so I signed up for the military, and the guy says, well, you're not 18 and you haven't graduated high school. We need your parents' approval. So I said, well, let me drag you home. So I took him home. My parents were super pissed, and they did sign, and a year later, I turned 18 and graduated high school within 2 weeks, and I was gone. And at 18, honestly, just fresh 18, you don't know what to be afraid of. It's just an adventure. And so it was probably one of the best decisions in my life, actually. But it was probably a little rocky in the beginning, yes.
What was that? Was there any moment where you're like, "Oh my God, why did I do this? Like, this is awful. I did I make a mistake?" Or was it pretty much smooth sailing? And I have a feeling it's the fire. Coming from my own experience, I got to tell you, although I didn't have a choice in the
I
matter.
see, I see. Well, I wouldn't call it smooth sailing, but for me, I was in better shape going in than I was in basic training because that really wasn't that strenuous. But I did see a lot of people struggle there, and I was in awe of that. It was all the things: first flight, first time away from home, all the things. But it was just so exciting and such an adventure. I didn't really have time to pause and, wonder what was going on. And then I thought to myself, well, it's 6 weeks, right? Like I could put up with a lot of things for 6 weeks, and historically, thousands and thousands of people live through this. So I'll live through it. It'll be fine. That was my mentality.
I love that usage kind of perspective, limited time, this shall pass kind of philosophy. That's brilliant. That's quite impressive for an 18 and 19-year-old. I gotta say, I absolutely love that. And let me ask you this. In retrospect, it's a period that was a period of growth and learning. Keep me honest here. What do you look back and say to other people? What are the lessons that you've learned that you like to spread that actually came from your time in the Air Force?
I think everybody, including you, right, that the bonds that you build there are the most unique ever. And I would say that, fast forward all these years is that what I learned, the discipline stays with you for life, right? So if you want to get up at 5 every day and play racquetball, you do it without any hesitation. But I think also what it did for me was it gave me that camaraderie that became honestly my management style. So it works sometimes it doesn't work for, specific individuals, but I can tell you that when I do have employees in a company, I do tend to run it like that, and we do have several veterans within our company, so it does suit them well also, but it doesn't always, resonate with everyone. So you kinda have to, adjust a little bit, but it did give me that structure for a management style.
So we got to dive into this because what does that mean? What is this management style, and what are the fundamental tenets of that management style, and why do they come from the Air Force? What is the connection?
You'll have to repeat that, Ari, we lost you there for a second.
Absolutely. So tell me more about this management style. You said it's unique, and you said it meets some people, meets doesn't meet others, and so you adjust. But what is that management style? Tell us more.
I think it's more of, let's just get the job done mentality of, what do we want to do if we say this is what we're going to do. Let's just, use something fun. We're going to the moon, right? And the majority of people in the military, okay, great. You know, this is what we're going to do. Like this is the first step, or this is where I'm going to help, or whatever. And it's just to get that job done, right? Where they sometimes people need a lot of structure. Like, oh well,
Yeah.
how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
We'll get to how, but I need you to get on board that we're doing it first, right? So sometimes the how people will slow it down, or they don't want to run as fast as we run kind of thing. So there is a balance. I've learned that, my way is not always the most effective. There is a balance there of, trying to get people to get on board and give them structure and goals and definitions as opposed to like, look, get on the train or get off, that kind of mentality.
Is this something that you think is almost a personality type? Is it something that you look for while hiring?
Mm, I think there is people, within the hiring, if that's what, we look at who comes into our group well, is that you certainly need a mix, right? It can't all be, gung ho kind of environments. Yeah, the rah rahs. But there has to be the ability to make a decision, the ability to look forward, and also honestly, I think the most interesting characteristic that you have to have is you have to be curious, right? Like if you just want to do the job and check the box off on a piece of paper and not understand why that part did that, or why that, we were talking earlier about radars, why is that doing that? If you don't have the curiosity behind it, you probably aren't in the right spot in the company. Yeah.
Is curiosity that something that you either have or don't have, or is that something that can be taught? And when you think about, your family, your employees, is that something you try to teach?
I think you have to find out what motivates that particular employee that makes them curious, right? I'm not gonna be
Hold on,
curious about
that's really
everything, right?
interesting. So you're saying there is a way to help people get there through motivation. Explain, if you can, tell a story or give an example of no name if you want, of how that happened, how that worked. That would be so wonderful.
I'd probably give you the most interesting one, and maybe without knowing the characters, it won't be quite as interesting, but so when I bought the company, there was a couple employees that came with it, a couple. And as we grew it, it turned quickly and we had, we doubled and tripled the amount of employees rather quickly. But there was a residual employee that just wasn't getting on board. And I didn't think he would stay actually, but he had just great skill, just wasn't applying himself. And for a long time, a couple years, I couldn't figure out what motivated this guy. And after I figured it out and I turned that trigger on, it happened to be he was very family driven and very just a fabulous father, right? And still is to this day. And once I realized that, I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I motivate him that does this? So
That's a
there
hard
was an
one.
award, he didn't want to travel for it. I know it is. Yeah. And he was a bit hard-headed and I'm hard-headed, so it was a bit of a, banging. So he had done so well that the company won an award and on his efforts and behalf, and, he didn't wanna go get it. And I thought, "Okay, I'm not gonna force him to go get it, but what I am gonna do is take the money that I would have spent for him to go get this award, and I gave it to him to take his family to a ball game."
Brilliant.
And that was the turning point
Brilliant.
immediately, right? So
How
immediately
did you figure out the kind of what was that thing that he deeply cared about? Well, and because it took a while, right? So there was a process there. What was your kind of steps and learnings in that process? I think incentive design is probably one of the most fascinating things. So it's incredibly important, I would say. And I think, keep me honest here if you disagree. I think that money is almost never the right answer. Sure, people need to be absolutely compensated fairly, absolutely, but throwing more money at a problem doesn't always solve.
no. That I totally agree with you, yes, the money at some point is not the motivator for sure. You gotta be able to live well, pay your bills, all these things, and feel like you're worth, you're getting paid for your worth. But it's more than that, right? It is that the company's invested in you personally, right? Like we try to find what motivates people so that we understand, what drives what gets them out of bed to get to work every day. That's really what you find.
Brilliant. I love that. I think it's an art that you don't always see. Definitely not with the big corporations. Sometimes I wonder how some people in these massive corporations ever became managers because they really don't care of their people. So, Marty, I just want to take a moment here to say I appreciate you because good leaders and good bosses are kind of hard to find, unfortunately, in today's day and age. So I think that's wonderful. It's delightful. I want
Thank you.
to.
I think it's easier when you're small, right? We're not Intel or some large corporation.
It's true, and yet and I appreciate your humble response, but I've also seen small organizations that kind of mess it up totally. So radars or really electronic warfare is an incredibly interesting topic. Give us a little bit of an intro to the area. Where did this come from? Where did it start? Why is it important? Is there a moment in history that is kind of, close to your heart?
Well, I'm definitely not the historian you are, but for me, I didn't know any of these things, prior to the military. And to learn how we keep our pilots safe by electronic countermeasures and all of the tricky things that, we can do, even back in the day, right? It's fascinating. And, my hat's off to the designers and people that are designing and creating these radar systems and electronic warfare, jamming and all that. Even like the terrain following radar, right? It's super exciting if you ever see it, if you watch a movie, Mission Impossible or whatever, when they're literally just following the terrain at 200 feet. It's really fascinating because if you think about it, the science behind that is that there's a sound wave going out and coming back at this, incredible speed so that it always knows where the land is and where you are, right? So it constantly is adjusting you to stay at 200 feet above the surface. So it's the same thing on, jamming radars is that first thing we do is, we check out chaff and try to scatter it and all these things. But
Sorry for the audience, chaff question mark.
like pieces of aluminum foil, let's say, to scatter, a signature, like get noise in there, if you will. But I just, the technology now, today, all these years later, is so much more advanced. And obviously, we have a lot of unmanned vehicles now and things like that. So it's just the sensors, just the sensor business to allow some of these radars and functionalities in aviation to exist and perform. There's never been a more exciting time.
And you said to keep our pilots safe. So what's without this technology, what is the worst case scenario? What's the function that it actually provides? Because not all of us are kind of, knowledgeable about military tactics and defense.
Okay, so if they let's say we have a fighter jet, flying along in friendly or unfriendly territory, whatever it might look like. There's ground radars that are tracking them or trying to track them, but let's say they lock on and there's a surface to air missile gets launched to them, then jamming radars are what, you know, plus maneuverability, but jamming radars are the electronic version of how we evade the surface to air missile, basically.
And the jamming, what does that mean? Are we jamming the missile or something else?
Yeah, we're jamming the missile.
So it's basically the missile's ability to track the craft, basically.
Correct, yes.
Appreciate that. So this is quite a topic. Obviously you got into it through the Air Force, but did you fall in love with it at some stage? Was it the math? Was it the physics? Was it the inventiveness? What was the moment where you're like, yeah, I'm going to make a career out of this?
Does one ever plan the career? I'm not sure.
I
I th
appreciate that comment.
For sure, it sparked, my mental interest from, how my brain works. And I had great parents, they were very hands-on people too, my dad was very mechanical, so it just fired all of the things on how my brain works. So you talk about employees, so sometimes when we have an interview, I say to the candidate, "All right, if your lawnmower breaks, what do you do?" Now the guy that says, "Oh, I put it in the trunk and I take it over to this repair shop," I'm like, "Get out." And the guy that says, "Oh, well, I check, make sure gas, oil, I pull the plug, see if there's a spark, and I've, pulled the thing." Okay, you're hired, right? So it's that kind of mentality of, the basic things in life, right? Fix your lawnmower. But I think that it has certainly, the technology. If you even if we don't look at the military, right? Just look at technology in the last 20 years since, cell phones, internet. Now we're coming into the AI age. The technology is leading the world, right? It's not just
Yes.
leading the military. So if you're not in it, I don't know that at late in life you can get in it. So, it's the cutting edge, it's leading edge. You always are, on the latest technology. I mean, it's tough to beat.
I appreciate that. What would you say? I want to challenge you for a moment here. On the one hand, I agree with you. I think it is really difficult to become a tech late in life. On the other hand, I want to believe in the infinite capability of people to be curious and to learn. And I got a friend, he's a firefighter, and I'm like, dude, you need to learn AI. And I'm like, I'll teach you. Like I know everything about it, and it's not that hard. And you can like do amazing things. People will think you're a magician. So I want to take that philosophy as well. As a leader in your organization, you also want to grow your own people, because this is a real thing in a lot of businesses. Like, how do we adopt AI? Because if we don't, it's probably somebody else is going to squash us. They're going to come after us. When you think about this, what is your strategy? Is it about education? Is it about bringing out in outside consultants? Is how do you kind of morph in this current, maybe one of the most interesting periods that we've had in the last 100 years?
I think it's a fascinating question. I'm gonna back up one step for you and say that I
Absolutely.
think it started with Apple's ability to provide an iPad that was so intuitive that my 5-year-old niece or my 70-year-old mother could pick up and operate, right? So that changed the world, honestly, in my mind,
Yes.
is that, if they sat down at a computer and had to figure out how to get in the software and the keyboard and the mouse and all these things, they could do it, but it took a minute. But you give them an iPad and it was so intuitive that they take it and run, right? So I think that changed the trajectory of how we learned, and I think that AI just is a very far extension of that, is that now, the learning curve is almost immediate, but I think we have to figure out, like everybody's talking, what are we gonna do with this AI?
Right.
And you're asking about what we're doing as a company. I can assure you that we're doing all the things you said. We've brought in consultants, we've powwowed together,
Yeah.
we use it. I think, our marketing team has done an amazing job using it, but we want, more use of it in our financial platforms, on our ability to price. We have historical data for 10 years. We want to know, where the trend is, where do we win, where do we lose on this part number, all of these things. And we're attacking it on all fronts for sure and trying to stay ahead of the curve, honestly.
It's not a question that has a great answer because it's incredibly difficult, but nobody has the answer. But I think these are all the right directions, and it kind of scares me because we don't know where this is going and how it's going to evolve. What are the things that keep you up at night when it comes to evolving technology?
Well, great question there. First off, I am the biggest non-social media person in the company or in my
Thank
in
you.
my world, honestly. So, I'm hoping that AI does not, proliferate the AI, falsification of, what 16-year-old girls should look like, and, all these things that affect my personal life, my nieces and things. So it scares me that the dissent and division of humanity basically is going to proliferate because we're now gonna be fed information that was not generated by the human heart or even the human mind.
I mean, this in fairness, this we call it fake news now, and we call it AI slop, and tomorrow, whatever it's going to be. But this idea of propaganda has been around for hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and it's incredibly difficult. It really is. My dad used to tell me that if you want to read the truth, read the Democrats newspaper, read the Republicans newspaper, read three other newspapers, read what everybody says. All of them are wrong, but all of them have some part of the picture, and that's incredibly hard work. Like, that's not something that people want to do. And in fact, to be brutally honest, not a lot of people want to read the newspaper. They want to get that tagline of information. And I got to tell you, most of the taglines are wrong. Even compared to the article itself, like the article tells a whole different story. That's just what we call modern day clickbait, right? Is what those, you know. So, I mean, I'm so frustrated. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to teach my children on this topic. What would you advise? How do we become, better as humans when it comes to consuming information? And I have a 12-year-old daughter, so this is definitely a very personal question.
Yes, my niece just turned 16 on Monday, so I've been watching her, consumed by her electronics for years, so it's close to the heart. I think that honestly, as simple as it sounds, is that you gotta put the electronics down, right? I know how hard it is. I know that, there's a lot of push out here in the world. I applaud the countries that are limiting screen time and age restrictions and things like that. I applaud that because there's nothing more stimulating than a great hike and outdoors and, swimming, skiing, whatever it is. But if we're losing the basics of life, because we're sucked into the electronics, and I would say the next generation is gonna struggle mightily if mentally struggle mentally if they cannot, expand their joys in life away from the electronics, honestly.
Talk to me about joy. What do you think is the this is a really difficult one. What do you think is the secret to joy in your perspective? And maybe if you have one, what is even the definition of joy?
I'm not that deep a philosopher, Ari. I think it's very individual, right? So, again, I come back to my family. My parents were super. We didn't have much money, but they were big on adventure. So, as life continued for me, my adventures are still pretty big. And so for me, that's pure joy to be on some wild adventure that's totally safe in my mind. But other people are like, oh, my word, you're taking such a risk. And I don't see it as a risk. But I think there's, just find what you love out there and go do it. I like sometimes people say,
I want to
I,
say for a
yeah,
person
go
who's
ahead.
not a philosopher, your answer of family and the journey is the joy is absolutely brilliant. I couldn't agree more. So I just point out there that I appreciate that.
I think there's sometimes this mentality of when somebody says to me, "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm gonna go up to San Fran and, do this or that." And they're like, "Oh, I would love to go to San Fran. The ticket's $120. Pick it up, go along." So sometimes that, being stuck is just like take the first step, right?
And this is a huge soapbox moment for me because I'm huge anti victimism. Like, oh, I can't do that, and oh, this is happening to me. You make the decision, you go do it, you take control, don't blame anybody else. And I would guess that we probably agree on.
Yes, yes, we several of us went to the Dolomites for 4 days, and we had to pack in all of our stuff on our backs, and we went refugio to refugio. It's called the Via Ferrata, the Iron Road, and
Brilliant.
after the first day, we're like, "Wow, maybe we're in over our heads," right? So, we get up every single day of that trip, we're like, "Can we do it again?" And we're like, "We have to, because the only way out's a helicopter," right? So, I think you gotta find your own adventure that, makes you feel like you're alive.
I'll circle something back. At the beginning, you talked about, you almost touched it, but really what you were saying is that, in the adversity and the difficulty, that's where bonds are made. And I think that's definitely true in the Air Force, the military, intelligence, wherever you come from. But in a way, that's also true in your story, right? When people come together over shared experiences and shared challenges, and maybe even more so than shared joy and happiness and partying is what I would argue.
I think that partying together certainly, has its place, but only after a great day of hiking, you have to bond some
I
other
love, I
way.
love that. I love that. Marty, this has been such a joy. I appreciate you. There is one really hard question. It's the only question that is scripted. It's the only one that we ask every single guest. And it's a difficult one because it's intensely personal. If you had to go back to the most difficult moment of your life and give yourself some advice that if it was 20 years ago or 2 years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
It's the I can tell you the most difficult point in my life was losing somebody instantly, you're madly in love with, it's to reach out for help. So, I'm very much a doer in everything, right? So sometimes I just do it myself, but there's always somebody they want to help, right? They want to help you. They, in the simplest of things, hold the door, carry your groceries, anything. And people love to help, and it makes them feel good as well, right? So if I looked back at that time, I would have accepted more help, and I would have talked more about it, and probably, got over the mourning process years earlier, right? So, for sure, there is help. There's people that love you, and they want to talk. They want you to lean on them. So sometimes it's tough to lean, but I encourage the lean.
Especially for strong people that are concerned to show their own weaknesses. Swallow that ego and ask for help. I completely agree. Marty, thank you so much for joining the show today. This was brilliant. I appreciate you. And you know what? I'm going to give you a very rare thing. I'm going to ask for you to come back.
Awesome. Thank you. It's been great talking to you, and I would love to dive in a little bit on your history as well because it's intriguing.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.